think it should be better now.
Awesome.
Okay, so can you all mute yourselves so that there is no interruption? And we'll take question and answers towards the end. I think that'll be better because I have certain slides and I think it will be, in general, a good idea. So how does this topic came about, right? So architecture and yoga, it kind of sounds kind of weird in the first stance, but I think it is all integrated. I think all these arts and sciences are ultimately leading to the same point, and how you connect these dots. In my case, me being an architect and me being on the path of yoga, I was able to sort of connect these dots at a very young age during my college days. So my journey into architecture sort of started when I was 18, and journey into yoga started through Vivekananda Kendra of Bangalore at the age of 19 or 20, somewhere around there. So I kind of started on that same path, and I soon started realizing that there are these parallels that I can draw. And I was able to draw some parallels with the performing part of it. Okay, so those are the things that then ultimately this whole investigation sort of culminated in my thesis in the graduate school when I designed the National Library of Singapore as my part of my design thesis. And that's when it sort of all came together in my mind. Okay, so why architecture and yoga? Because there are few things that they're both sort of monastic professions. I do have a guru in architecture who was the project architect for the Indian Institute of Management in Ahmedabad, the first IIM that was built. And he became super instrumental in my life. And I have guru in yoga as well. And we have him joined today from Irvine, so he's listening. And on the path, I was introduced to many gurus as I went through from one school to the other. Started with Vivekananda Kendra, then I got introduced to Sarthi Yoga Foundation. Through that, I got introduced to Bihar School of Yoga. Then I got into Nikam Yoga in Singapore. And then ultimately, I got into Iyengar in LA for about a couple of years. So, and then finally, I just got my 200-hour certification last week through Vivekananda Yoga again. So it just started with Vivekananda and ended with Vivekananda. Having said that, I'm going to share my screen and let's get started with what there is. So let me see. If I can figure this out. There you go. Okay. So let me see if I can switch this off. Okay, here we go. So what you're seeing on the screen is there are two things happening. There is a architectural expression in the backdrop, and there is yogic pose for Virabhadrasana, as you can see. And the idea here is that both are expressions of form. And Both are made out of Panchamahabhut. Okay, so there's a famous architect in Portugal. His name is Alvaro Siza. And he said that architects really don't create anything, they just rearrange the reality. And in our case too, I mean, you know, the Panchamahabhut, the whole Prakriti game, sort of as we know, is basically taking these subatomic particles and it rearranges and gives us the form, same as what's happening in architecture. The next slide is going to talk about between silence and light. So the famous architect who built the IIM in Ahmedabad, he was my guru's guru. Okay, so he built the Salk Institute in La Jolla, California, Kimball Art Museum, the Capitol complex of Bangladesh, and he was seen as a mystic in the field of architecture because he would say things which came from a much, much deeper source. So Khan always saw architecture as the meeting of the measurable and the unmeasurable. And it's like the union of Jivatma and the Paramatma, if I can put it in the language of yoga. So what was he talking about, measurable and unmeasurable? So he's saying basically that architecture comes from the unmeasurable. So something that is unmanifested, something that has the will to exist. And that will to exist sort of manifests itself from the unmeasurable. Why it is unmeasurable? Because it's infinity out there. And that infinite will decides to manifest in the form of an architectural form, if you will. And that comes in the moment it takes this nama rupa, it gets into the Panchamahabhut, the realm of Dvaita, if you can relate with that a little bit. And the moment it gets into the Dvaita, it becomes measurable. We can measure it, we know exactly what the dimensions are, right? And it becomes a graspable entity, okay, from a distance. Now, what is architecture supposed to do? It comes from the unmeasurable into the measurable, but experientially, it takes you back into unmeasurable. How? The moment you step in, and not every building will do this. I'm talking about the architecture of Louis Kahn and these famous, amazing architects who have built, whom I worship. I'm talking about that, like even the Rome, like if you're in Pantheon, for instance, you are awestruck by what has been built, okay? It doesn't matter whether it is modern or whether it's the ancient temple of Kailash in Aurangabad or whether it is the Khajuraho temple in Kandariya Mahadev or any other experience whenever you're awestruck by architecture, okay? That awestruck moment takes you back into the unmeasurable thing because you're not there at that point in time. Sometimes you see this beautiful sunset and you completely lose this sense of existence. And architecture has the power of doing that. You're awestruck by something that has been built. Yes, it is built by the humans, but you're consumed completely. Your psyche is consumed. So he's talking about that. And at that point in time, momentarily, you don't exist. You don't exist, meaning, yes, physically we exist, but mentally, psychologically, psychically, our sense of existence is gone. Just like something that happens in a cinema theater, for instance. You forget your own thing, your own existence for a few minutes, and you unite with so the Jivatma unites with the Paramatma for that particular moment. And then when the phenomena is over, you're back into the reality. So you come back to the sense of existence here. So he used the words like silence for the unmeasurable, for which is not manifested, and the word light for that is measurable, for that which is manifested. So he says that, Einstein basically says E equals mc square. So all that matter that is there is basically a solidified version of energy, or energy is a other expression of the matter. So they're interchangeable, all right? So they constantly, that fission and fusion is happening in the universe. And what Khan is saying that all the nature, all the material, everything that we can see, feel, and experience tangibly is all spent light. So if you look at our sun, it takes about 8 minutes for the light from sun to come to the earth. And what is that light? Where is that light coming from, right? So ultimately, the sun is losing in its matter, and it's converted to the light. So it's the opposite of Khan talking about. But the light is spent. All right. So that's what he is saying. Now, light and enlightenment. So architecture is a relentless pursuit of beauty and light. So in my own works, I try to sort of imbue some of these, ideas and see how I can pursue the light. Now, light can mean the light, the visible light, but it can also mean the knowledge. It can also mean the experience of light. It can also mean many different things. So, tamasoma jyotirgamaya, like the Rishi in the Upanishad has said. So, yoga is a relentless pursuit of light and enlightenment. Why light? Because we're seeking knowledge. We're constantly seeking the experience of that. But we're also having this idea that the path of yoga, whether it be karma yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, or it could be your ashtanga yoga, they're all ultimately leading to the enlightenment. Okay, that's the final result. And this famous Sanskrit Shubhashit, if you've heard about it, it's like, it says, Akashat patitam toyam yathagachati sagaram keshavam, the Sarvadeva Namaskaram, Keshavam Pratigachati. So all that rain that falls in your backyard, in the streams, in the Himalayas, wherever, that one droplet ultimately will go back to the ocean. It will find its way, all right, through the streams, through evaporation, through ponds, whatever. It will ultimately go back to the ocean. So that's what it is saying, that ultimately all this pursuit of yoga could potentially, or has the potential of taking you back into this state of union. And that union we talked about earlier, but that is momentary union. But this is, we're talking about something that is more eternal. Okay. So this comes from Brihadaranya Upanishad. Now, form and space. So architecture as an art form, as the extension of the human body. So when we are in our own homes, and you may have experienced this while even driving a car, unless you are one with that car, you cannot really gauge where that bumper ends or the tail ends. And so our consciousness while we're driving has expanded at least to the limits of the car, so that the car becomes the extension of the human body. And similarly, in our homes, the home becomes sort of an extension of the human body, while the space stays as a common denominator in both the inner and the outer space. When we close the eyes, there is infinite space inside. We open the eyes, there's infinite space out there. Now, James Turrell is a very famous artist who did the Rodin crater. It's not open to public yet, but he works with light. He literally sculpts with light. And there was an exhibit here at SMOCA in Scottsdale, which I had attended a few years ago. And I had this experience about, I was in his installation, and whether my eyes were open or closed, it did not matter. The space inside to the outside was one. And that is the power of his work that can actually make you experience something like that, okay? So architectural form is a wrapper of space within space. Space itself being formless is then potent to manifest into infinite forms using elements such as the earth, water, fire, air, right? And in our case, we call it the space, which is the fifth element. So within that infinite space, architecture sort of becomes something as a part of manifestation using the Pancha Mahabhut. And then inside, if you think of a pot, right, we call it in the pranayama, there is a sthiti called Kevala Kumbhak Sthiti, where you're existent, but you're not breathing. There is really no need to breathe anymore because you've hyperventilated through after Kapalabhati per se. So in that time, the kumbha, which is what we are the kumbha, and you've read this in literature many times, the human body is considered the kumbha. So what happens when there is a kumbha? The consciousness is formless within the corporeal body, and body is inside consciousness at the same time. Now, if you imagine a pot, per se, the space inside that pot and the space outside the pot is the same thing. Okay, but when it is inside, we call it Jivatma. But when it unites with the Paramatma outside, it becomes one, but it's the same thing. There is no difference. But in our perception, with our little minds and brains, whatever we can comprehend, we come up with these kind of theologies, if you will, to express the expression, whether it's a Jivatma or a Paramatma. So Mahavira said, Appa, so Paramatma. So the Atma that you have inside is the Paramatma. But it's the space inside the pot is however much finite there is. That's the perception of finite. But if you move the pot, does the space move around it? Does the space move when I move the pot? No. The pot is moving within the space. That's what's happening. So space inside the kumbha and outside is same. So that's one way of expressing in architecture is the internal space and the external. So Frank Lloyd Wright, if you study his work, he's always tried to kind of merge these two, interior and the exterior. Always you'll see his works that he brings you at a very low scale and he leads your eye instantly outside. And why he's trying to do that? Because he loves nature. And when he loves nature, he wants to put you in touch with nature. So yeah, temporarily you come inside, but physically you're inside, but mentally he takes you out instantly. And he called it the organic architecture in his expressions. Here's a very important thing, minimalism. So Constantin Brancusi is a European sculptor, and he made a very interesting statement, which in my readings it appeared. It says, simplicity is not a goal in art, but an end result. And so does that sound like, to me, it definitely sounds like karmanyavadhikaraste mafaleshu padachana. So your goal is not towards the fruit. You do the work and you get the fruit in the end, but you're not working towards the fruit. You're not trying to achieve that. So simplicity is something that happens as a part of reticence. You drop that which is not necessary. So Michelangelo, if you will, he is sculpted, he's painted, you know all that, right? So in Agony and Ecstasy, the book on him, there he says that whenever he takes a piece of marble, he looks at it, he meditates upon it, and he actually sees the entire sculpture inside that piece of marble. And then he takes a chisel. Once he sees that, he takes the chisel and starts taking out what is unnecessary. So that when unnecessary is dropped, simplicity remains in the end. So minimalism is not the goal, but a derivative of process of reticence, similar to the minimalism at the core of yoga, focusing on the unconditioning of the human psyche. So what are we doing in yoga? So our minds are conditioned. And that conditioning happens through many sources, through the society, through the family, through friends, through, college colleagues, whoever you met lives an impression in that psyche inside. And there are certain sanskars that we call them, whether they are good or bad. I'm not talking about that. Invariably, all those sanskars will condition the mind. That means it will muddle your perception. So that means if I'm wearing these glasses and I'm not wearing the glasses, there is a difference in what I'm seeing. So these sanskaras basically are in your way of what is and what you're trying to see through the glasses. So what are we trying to see? We are conditioned to see as we would like it to be. We are not seeing the reality as it is. And that's where all the confusion starts in our perceptions, in our lives, and we complicate lives because of that, because we cannot see things as they are. And so the system of yoga is designed to uncondition the mind, unclutter the mind, and go beyond the mind. That's the thing that the system of yoga, whether you're doing karma yoga, whether you're doing bhakti yoga or jnana yoga, whichever path of yoga you're following, but they all will ultimately uncondition your mind. And when that conscious mind and the subconscious mind are completely unconditioned, the superconscious mind is born. And that superconscious mind is a pure, unconditioned mind that happens in yoga. And that happens in architecture as well. All right. We have these preconceived notions that architecture should be like this or should not be like this. Those conditionings are constantly trying to shape the architecture. If I do a modern temple, people think, nah, it doesn't look very cool. It needs all those carvings on it. Conditioning came in. If I do a super modern temple with nothing, or a completely ornate temple with all the carvings and everything, the other side of the mind says, this is too busy. So that conditioning steps in. So what am I to do, right? So the idea is that minimalism that happens through unconditioning. So you put aside all the conditioned notions of the mind and you approach architecture fresh. So you see every moment in yoga as fresh. It comes and it goes. It comes and it goes. That is the present moment, which is absolutely unconditioned moment. But we cannot stay there. It comes and goes, comes and goes. We cannot catch it. And when do we catch it? Probably when we are meditating, probably when you're looking at a beautiful sunset out there. So that's the unconditioned mind that can perceive sun as it is. You can see it directly, you're awestruck by it. That's when you really see it. Okay, so why monastic minimalism? So the lifestyle changes of a yogi. Why it changes? Because of the unconditioning of the mind. The unconditioning mind happens. So what happens? The vasanas of acquiring more and more and more. I want a bigger house, better car, better job, more paying job. That's all vasana. So when we are unconditioning the mind, there is this dropping of the vasanas because your mind is getting purer and purer, purer and purer. And so architecture also, when I drop all the unconditioning of my preconceived notions and approach architecture with the purity of the mind, it kind of gives you that peace. It allows you to become absolutely peaceful. And I'll talk to you about when I'm going to show some of my work. So both yoga and architecture are practices striving to attain inner and outer minimalism. Aesthetic minimalism of the modern architecture and minimalistic lifestyle of a yogi. So yogi becomes something he can completely renounce everything. And that renunciation is happening step by step, step by step, step by step. And there are people who do abhyasa of that, but that renunciation is different. But when it comes from within through the understanding of the unconditioned mind, that simplicity, then whether I wear something like this or whether I coat or whether I wear whatever, you don't have to be Gandhi to be expressing that simplicity out there. Okay. Now Gandhi chose his path. That was a different story, where Gandhi was also a politician. He was also a yogi on one side. So he had to have his own expressions, and that worked, so empty mind, no mind of a yogi through meditation. So if you read Kabir, Kabir uses this word amaniya. And why he's using amaniya? Because thought, you need the thought for the mind to exist. Okay, thought is time. A thought starts here and ends here. So it needs time. So the moment the dimension of time comes into play, space comes into play, because spatio-time is a yin and yang of each other. Okay, whenever there is time, there is space there. If there is space, there is time there. And you can discover this in Einstein's relativity and all of that. So a thought will need the time, and the moment you are in the time and space phenomena, you are in the duality. You are into Dvaita of the yoga. So how do you go into the Advaita? When the time stops. And how does the time stop? When you're awestruck. When are you awestruck? You could be awestruck in many different conditions. You could be awestruck when you're completely immersed in your meditation, the time stops and 2 hours went by, you don't even know. You open the eye and look at 2 hours gone by, the time stopped for you. I'm not talking about chronological time, the psychological time that we deal with. More. I want more all the time. So that's the thing I'm talking about. Now, here is my pet peeve about architecture and yoga, both. Both are pure in their expressions. Both can be absolutely practiced in their purity if you really take them seriously, okay? So that you're not milking them to make money, but you're actually serving them. And when does that happen? So here, Juhani Pelasma, I've known him for almost 14 years now, is a great architect in Finland. And he's written an article. Actually read a paper in ASU, and this is an abstract from that paper, that architecture has become a threatened art form. The authentic art of building is curiously marginalized by two opposite tendencies: instrumentalization and aestheticization. On one hand, buildings are regarded as mere instruments of simplistic functional performance and shrewd profit making. And on the other hand, objects of visual seduction, flirting with conservatism of taste, or projecting images of superficial novelty. In today's world of instant imagery, architecture seems to be turning into a device of momentary persuasion through the process of aestheticization. So this is what he said. And when I heard this, I absolutely fell in love with this guy. It was like he just hit that murmur inside my heart. And so that same thing is kind of happening to the industry of yoga. You know, yoga has become a means of shrewd profit making. It's fashionable to be yogi these days, carrying your yoga mat, trying to show off in the buses and wherever, you know, in trains. I've seen that enough in Singapore and in LA. And seductive clothing and fake marketing imagery and all of that. Are we talking about that yoga? No. But I still had to mention this because I really want to practice yoga and architecture in its purest essence. And let's see if I'm able to do that. Now, Bhakti Yoga and the Ashtanga Yoga. So there are two aspects. So one is the path of Buddha and Mahavir, who followed the Ashtanga or the Hatha Yoga path. The other is Meera, Chaitanya, Narad on one side, who are the epitomes of Bhakti Yoga, right? So what are they saying? So the Bhakti Yoga path basically has people like Narad who are singing, there is bhajan, there is devotion, there is surrendering in it, there is performing arts like the Bharatnatyam, there is performing arts like singing, and there is room for all of that to express the emotion. So there is Bhakti Yoga, which is more elaborate. It has room for offerings and, you know, all kinds of stuff we do. And it also has literature, it has architecture, it has sculpture on the other side, you know. And sculpture is very important. You have the idol. If you don't have the idol, what are you going to do in Bhakti Yoga, right? So they say that the idol needs to go through the process of prana pratishtha, then it goes into the temple, but it's ultimately stone. That doesn't change. So mano to Bhagwan, nahi mano to pattar, something like that. So for those who are not into Bhakti Yoga, Mark, okay, I'm going to quote a little quote from the dialogue of Narad and Shiva. In the Narad Bhakti Sutras, Narad comes to Shiva and asks, where do you like to reside? What is your most favorite space? Where? So Shiva opened his eyes and said, Mad Bhakta Yatra Gayantri Tatra Tishtami Narada. So I like to reside in the heart of the Bhakti yogi. That's what Shiva said. And he's not discriminating, but that's what he prefers. Okay, both these yogis, both these paths are ultimately leading to the same ocean, as we discussed earlier. So why are the temples? If you look at, now I'm coming to slowly into the Indian realm here. The temple becomes sort of the ultimate expression of Bhakti Yoga, Mark. You go to the temple, you bow down there, you're trying to make this connection between the intangibility inside of the idol and the intangibility inside you, the Jivatma and the Paramatma out there. And yes, the physical existence really doesn't matter when you're doing the prayers, you're completely engrossed into that. But if you observe architecturally, how does that help in the manifestation of the Bhakti Yoga in India, especially? Most of the Hindu temples, you will find that they're built on the banks of the rivers, the banks of the Godavari, the banks of Ganga, the banks of Yamuna, banks of Kaveri down there. So all these Narmada, how do you forget that, right? So you will observe the temples are along, so people do Narmada Yatra, all that, right? Why was architecture on the bank of these rivers? One of the reasons I can think of is this tatastha bhav. Now, what is tatastha? Tat is the bank of the river. And here you're seeing Varanasi, and I think in the last Sunday's talk, we discussed Varanasi in detail. And that was a phenomenal talk. If somebody has missed that, I hope it was recorded. And you sit on these banks of the river and you're watching the water flowing. Water is constantly changing by the minute. You can't even put your finger in the water and take it out and say, I dipped this finger in the Ganges, in the same Ganges. No, you cannot, because by the time it touches the water has flown. By the time it goes deeper inside, more water has flown under the bridge, right? So there's this constant, the consciousness, the river of the consciousness river inside is constantly flowing as the stream. And one is supposed to sit on the bank and look at the water, close the eyes, and look at the flowing thoughts in the mind. And so therefore temples gave that venue for people to meditate, venue for people to do the namaskara inside, but also to meditate and see the thoughts. Now, why the tatastha bhav comes in play? Because they say that when you meditate, you see a thought, don't get involved, stay out of it. Another thought comes, don't get involved, stay out of it. Keep that equanimity, keep that equilibrium of the mind, equipoise of the mind. And how does that happen? It happens through tatastha bhav. That means you don't really jump into the water. The moment you jump into the water, you're lost. You try to take matters in your hand and solve the problems, it's not going to solve. What is going to solve is just by observation. And this is what I teach every Sunday if you join my class Sunday mornings. So those are the things. And then we look at the other side now. So there is surrendering here in Bhakti Yoga. The ego is surrendered at the very first step. And then you basically jump into the river and you just flow. How do you do that? From Ganga starts from the Gangotri, or if you take Narmada, it starts from another source and goes to the Gulf on the other side. So the Ganga starts from the Gangotri and goes to the Bay of Bengal. Okay. So that is the flow of the consciousness of the human thing. Now, if you are a Bhakti yogi, you surrender. So you If you're in the water, you let the water take you wherever it's taking. Ultimately, you know that it's going to take you to the ocean. Now, what happens in case of people like Buddha or people like Mahavir or people like, who are hatha yogis, and they take matters in their hand and say, we are going to stand at the end of this river, the Bay of Bengal or the Bay of Cambay, and we're going to swim in the opposite current like a salmon all the way through, all the way to the Gangotri. So the ego doesn't drop until they reach the Gangotri. Whereas in Bhakti Yoga's path, the ego surrenders right at the Gangotri and then it just flows all the way to the thing. So on one hand, there is Buddha and Mahavir standing. On the other hand, there is Narad. You won't find better Bhakti Sutras than Narad. He is the epitome of Bhakti. On the other side, Buddha becomes the epitome of the Hatha Yoga, of the Ashtanga Yoga. In between these two poles, the entire humanity is there. People like me, I fall somewhere in this. I don't know where I am, but most of the people will fall between these two polarities. Okay, so having said that, here is one. So on the path of Purushartha, right? Why Purushartha? Because Buddha makes this Purushartha and he makes this Adhishtan, I am going to do this. So he sits under the peepal tree, the Bodhi tree, and ultimately attains enlightenment. But in the end, what he says, happiness cannot be found through great effort and willpower, but is already present in open relaxation and letting go. So here, letting go, he's talking about the language of a Bhakti yogi now. At the end of it, when he has reached all the way to Gangotri, that's when at the end he says this. Okay, so now let's talk about, so why I chose Bhakti Yoga, I just explained, because there is room for expression. Architecture needs room for expression. So I did this thesis as the library of National Library of Singapore. So I looked at two different schools of thought of Indian architecture of the Bhakti Yoga, the temples. One is a linear procession, and it has this layering of spaces in a linear way. So you come from Sabha Mandap, you go to another Mandap, you go to Garbhagriha, and you go to the inner sanctum, so that you constantly going from one space to the other, which is mentally preparing you. And you will see that initially in the Sabha Mandap, there is some connections to the outer world. There are some connections to the outer world. And then here, when you come in the end, it becomes tighter and tighter, closer and closer. And then ultimately somebody is unmuted. So this one becomes an absolute inner sanctum where there are no windows. Okay. If you go to South India, you will find temples which has a different expression. And what is that different expression? It is like a box within a box within a box. Could you please unmute whoever has unmuted? I cannot go back to Zoom. Thank you so much. Nope, it's still there. Somebody is still unmuted. Thank you. Oops, that's still here.
Apurvaji, can you unmute?
I think Amitji, you can mute everyone.
I can't because I'm in the. Let me see if I can. Here, let me see if I can do it. Mute all. Mute all. Okay. Oops. Okay. So the concept of library, I'm going to quickly read this because I can't memorize everything here. But the concept of library is deeply rooted into the Hindu philosophy of Bhakti Yoga. A typical Hindu temple is a symbol of idol worship and of Bhakti Yoga. The Bhakti Yoga teaches a yogi to be attached to the divine and detached from the desires at the same time, and detached from the ego and surrendering of the ego, and we discussed all that simultaneously. He enjoys the earthly pleasures by surrendering his ego, hate, ill will, desires, etc. He becomes an island, mentally rather than physically, like a sannyasi. So sannyasi, what does the sannyasi do? What did Buddha do? What did Mahavira do? They left the sansar and went into the jungle. So they become physically an island for the society, but also mentally they became islands out there by completely diving inside. Okay, so one thing I did not mention in the earlier slide, that the bhakti yoga leads to purnam. That's one. So I think that the truth, if you will, if I can express it, it's binary. In the computer language, they call it 101010. That's binary. So why is it binary? Because a bhakti yogi goes so much out there into that idol worship that he loses his own sense of existence and becomes one with that idol. So something that is outside, he goes in there and becomes one and loses himself here and becomes the Purna on the one side. Whereas people like Buddha, they make an inward journey. They dive deep into themselves to find what is truth. And when they dive deep inside, they forget the outside world. They become island completely. And when they become completely inside and they find the truth and only them remain. So the outside world is gone. Only them remain and they make the statements like Aham Brahmasmi. Okay? On the path of Bhakti Yoga, it becomes Purna. On the path of Ashtanga Yoga, it becomes Shunyam. But Shunya and Purna is the one thing. Om Purnamidam Purnamadam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. So it's all Purna in the end. Whether you take that infinity outside of the infinity, still the infinity is still there. And it can only be infinite if the infinity can be taken out of it. Only then it is infinite. Otherwise, it becomes finite, right? So similarly, a library metaphorically is a bhakti yogi. Why it is a bhakti yogi? Because in the middle of the city, and I'm talking about this particular hustle bustle of the city, that is, I'm designing a library in Singapore. So it's in the right smack in the city. So rest of the city mentally, but is attached physically to the bustling surroundings. So it is there. The physical form is there, but what does the library do? It becomes an introverted building. It allows you a moment whereby you can sort of become a detached island. So a library is a temple of knowledge, can be compared physically, metaphysically, and experientially to a traditional Hindu temple. Experientially, a bhakti yogi approaches an idol. So here's what happens. On the main axis, the red line, which is horizontal, a bhakti yogi enters the temple and goes through this series of slices of spaces, right? A series of slices of spaces, the processional quality there. And mentally, he is detaching the samsara. Mentally, he's becoming more and more detached as he proceeds from Sabhamandap all the way to Garbhagriha. By the time he's there, he is completely detached. So he comes here, he makes that connection between the idol and himself, between the intangibility inside the idol and the intangibility inside himself. There is that connection happens. He prays, he comes out from this mandap and makes a pradakshina. And from pradakshina, he comes inside one more time. Now, what does the pradakshina do? Pradakshina allows him to oscillate between the samsara and the Paramatma. Why? Because see how these ornate temples are? That is a reflection of the outside world. What is the outside world? Everything that goes on in the world is reflected in the sculptures of a temple. You will see all kinds of stories. Manchustar, Gajastar, all these layering are telling you stories about what's happening in the samsara. So he comes out and then he's connecting back to the outside world, comes inside, makes another connection with the inside world, and then leaves. And what happens if I take a book? I take a book in my hand, I open it, I'm holding a tangible book in my hand. but I'm looking for intangible knowledge within. Isn't that the same thing? I'm looking the intangibility in that idol, or am I looking intangibility in the book? To me, it's the same thing. Architecturally, it's the same thing for me. All right. So when I'm reading the book, this intangibility becomes so intense. It becomes an experience for me that I'm sitting on this chair, I'm reading the intangibility inside, I'm grasping that intangible knowledge. Mentally, I become an island. Physically, I'm still connected around. I'm still in the room. I haven't left this chair, but mentally, I go out there somewhere. This knowledge takes me on a journey. So that oscillation between intangibility and tangibility, tangibility and intangibility, is the realm in which I'm operating as an architect. On this side, you see this temple with this, which is box within a box within a box. You go to this, come through this gopuram, you travel around, you see, you pick up your flowers, nariyal, whatever you're picking up. You go inside, there's another box inside there. You go inside, there's another box. So there is layering of spaces, which is two-dimensional. Here, the layering of spaces in this temple here becomes a linear process. Here, it becomes a two-dimensional process. So let's look at what's happening here. So experientially, the Bhakti Yogi approaches, so we talked about this, tangible. After praying, once he goes around the temple to establish a contact with the tangible world, he enters the temple to pray through the secondary axis, and then temple becomes a connecting link between the yogi and the divine. Similarly, a library through books becomes a connecting link between a scholar and the knowledge. Also, culture and architecture both are tangible and intangibly connected, can be similarly linked by architectural built forms. Just like a yogi going to the temple for spiritual development, a scholar needs to isolate within the society for knowledge. Therefore, like a temple, the library should offer a temporary sense of respite, a temporary sense of absence. This thesis deals with the similar phenomena of isolation and connection. So I'm interested in both these phenomena, that this singular processional as well as this two-dimensional X and Y axis processional quality of the temple in the south. Okay, so here I am. Now we are looking at, I'm going to see if I can place myself here. So on the right side, you're seeing the Madurai temple, the Meenakshi temple. And you can see there are many different ways to approach the temple. You come in and you see all these boxes within boxes within boxes. Down here is the plan. You can clearly see it's a whole world inside. Okay. On the left side, you're seeing the Kandariya Mahadev temple processional quality in the linear axis. And on the top left corner, you're seeing the split gate. So when the Hinduism went all the way through Surya Varman, into the Southeast Asia, the Hinduism changed, the temples changed, but the expression of Bhakti Bhav still remains. So if you go to Bali, you will see that the Gopuram became like a split gate. They cut this Gopuram into half like this. So you go through this slice of space where the sky is still connected from inside to the outside. And I thought that was phenomenal as an architectural expression. So I wanted to use all of this into my library thesis. This plan is not very clear. I apologize for that. But here we go. So what I'm doing here now, I'm creating a box, which is going like this. Okay. And within this box, there is another box, which is here. And within that box, there is another box, which is here. And then ultimately, there is nothing but space inside. So the processional quality, what is going on here, right? So as you're walking on this footpath, on the sidewalk, one part of the footpath goes and becomes a ramp. So it becomes just peels, the footpath peels itself and becomes a ramp. The moment it becomes a ramp, you're walking and you suddenly get sucked into this ramp. So you are now in this processional quality of the ramp. And why is it a ramp? Because ramp gives you more time. You are entering the premises of the temple, but by the elevation, you're cutting off by the physicality. You're cutting off slowly from the hustle bustle around. And you come to this pinpoint here, which is the ramp is not only just going up, but it's also narrowing. Okay, if you look at the temple, the path become narrow. When does when you come to the end of the temple, the garbhagriha, the temple door is so small. You literally tuck inside and go. And all of that is part of the experience. Okay, so this experience I'm trying to create here is when you are at this spot and you make this left turn inside, that entire processional quality makes a paradigm shift into the psyche of the bhakta or of the scholar. What is that paradigm shift happening? Something like this: the air is inside, there's air outside. But if I do that, the same warm air comes out. But if I close my mouth, like if I want to whistle and go, the same air is compressed, and compression causes coolness. The same air changes its nature and becomes something else. So by the time you come inside here into this complex, you've gone through that narrow door, you've gone through that. So from here, you come into this narrow split gate into the same spot. From the other side, you come to this narrow pathway, and then you walk inside here and you land into this foyer. And there are lifts here, there is reception desk and what have you. Now, the famous architect Louis Kahn again said, when he was doing the Exeter Library in New Hampshire, he said that library should be an opportunity for a scholar to pick up the book from the dark and read it in the light. And when I read that, I was just completely awestruck by it. And I was like, wow, because he's saying, Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya. Pick up the book from the dark to read it in the light. And so that stayed with me, when I was doing this design of the temple, of this temple of knowledge. So how is this box created? There is a build form here. The yellow part that you're seeing is the cover of the book. So every book sort of has a cover, and you don't judge the cover of the book by the cover. But what does that cover do? It protects, first of all. Second thing, it gives you a glimpse of what the book is all about. It doesn't tell you the full story. You read the book from cover to cover, ultimately. So this cover of the book, when you're driving around this road, it is only giving you glimpses through these windows. These are kind of sliced openings. And those glimpses are just giving you a glimpse of what's inside. And what you're seeing inside is basically book stacks, people are reading. So you get, sort of excited about that, or you may get inspired to visit the library. So that's the cover of the book. On this side here, there's a bunch of trees. So I'm creating this wall out of the trees. And what trees do, they actually act as a buffer from the outside world to the inside. How? Because they absorb this. The acoustics of the trees are so amazing that it stops the sound. It creates this temporary absence of sound. So that's what I'm doing here, okay? So you pick up the book here, and then you go into this pavilion to read it. And then you can cross over a bridge and come to the other side. These are ancillary facilities out here. There's an auditorium, there's a cafe and all of that, which is also set into this kind of an inner box, if you will. So that's the premise of my library thesis, if I will talk about that. And then as you come inside, there's a courtyard. These bridges are connecting. That courtyard is bound by these trees again. And then at the center, there is nothing but space. So space becomes the ultimate consciousness. And that's where that space is, where you can just sit there and relax. And it's sunken in the ground. Okay, so here we go. So this is a house with all this background in my mind over the time. In 2005, I got this commission to design this house. And I called it the essence of the desert. And I'll tell you why it is essence of the desert, because everything about the desert it is sort of manifested in this. And at the same time, the phenomena of the sun. So Arizona is called, or the Phoenix Valley is called the Valley of the Sun. And I had to bring in some aspects of sun. So when I was actually hiking in these mountains, up, if you go much left, there is a Pinnacle Peak. I was hiking there once, and I found these huge boulders were leaning on each other. And at the same time, I found these flowers. They were blooming in the crevices of this, of this big boulders. And I saw that with an open mind. This is what yoga does. What yoga does is unconditions the mind. And when the mind is unconditioned, you see things. You look, but you also see them. So I saw in that boulders that life thrives in the shadow of the boulders. And I came back home to my drawing board and I was designing this house. And I said that could be a concept statement for this house. And so I took one of these boulders in my mind's hand like this, and I pressed it, and it became a wall. It had nowhere to go because I was pressing it. And I'm talking in the poetic language here, so bear with me for a minute. So I pressed it, and it became a wall. And I put that wall on the west side right here. This wall that is facing us is the west. And I put that wall there. And the moment I put the wall there, the sun peeped in my mind and said, "You're turning your back towards me." But on the other side, I was getting this immense shadow that was desirable. I said, "I need this shadow." But the sun is saying, "You're turning your back because I'm blocking all these beautiful sunsets to the west." So I thought I should do something about the sun. And before I could say anything to sun, the sun said, "The thought even crossed your mind to do that wall is because of my very own existence." And I said, "Yes, I totally owe that to you, and I'm going to do something special for you." So that night when I went to bed, 3 o'clock, I got up, and there was this thought in the mind, what I'm going to do to the sun, for the sun rather. And so I thought that maybe what happens if the sun sets in that wall on a particular day at a particular time. So in the morning, I called the clients and I said, "Give me all the important dates of your lives." And I took them, I studied them in the computer. I was teaching at ASU, so I mentioned that to one of my students. And he was like, "Yeah, we can do this. There are softwares that can give us all this information." So we started doing research and we found out that yes, we can do that. So we both came to the site and we studied through a clinometer what are the sun angles through the computer. I was already knowing the azimuth and the altitudes. But then I thought of something more fun. I said, no, I mean, it's just the setting. That's the end of the day. So I picked their wedding anniversary. And I said, what can I do on their wedding anniversary? So what we did, we came to the site and we measured how high that mountain is, okay, right here. And there's this little bowl right here. It turned out that on their wedding anniversary, the sun was going to rise somewhere in this bowl. So we measured the height of that by using this clinometer, okay? So what the clinometer does, it gives you the angle of the tip of that mountain till where I'm standing. We took that angle and fed that to the computer. The computer gave us this answer that, okay, at 7 a.m. on that wedding anniversary, the sun is going to peep out of that mountain. So, okay, we said, okay, 7 o'clock, we're going to take those first rays inside their master bedroom. And we'll shun that light in a particular day at a particular time. And let's see what we can do. So that became sort of an intangible gift from me because this was my debut project. And I said, okay, I got to do something to them. So I invited them to the site on the previous year because it was under construction. And we said that be here on a certain day. And they showed up on their anniversary. And we saw that the sun exactly came and hit a particular window inside at 7 a.m. for 2 minutes. And they were completely awestruck. They both were like literally in tears. And so that became an experience. So I said, okay, in the evening, can you meet us again at the site? So by the time it was evening, this wall was already built. So I brought them there and then we opened champagne. And at around 6:30 in the evening, the sun exactly sets into that slot. And I'll tell you how that all happens. So here it's the plan of the house. This is the first floor plan. On the left side, what you're seeing is the drone picture of the house. So you come in, you park your car. As a guest, you come through here and you come to the main gate right there. This is the main door into the courtyard. And you're seeing this courtyard at the back. There's a pool, there's a ramada here, there's a guest house. So all of that is happening right there. Now, she is Chinese and he is Italian. So here the East is meeting the West. And I wanted to see if I could potentially do something as a marriage of both these cultures. So again, let's look at the West Eastern thought. In East, we say that everything is cyclical. Okay, a child is born, he grows into an adult, he retires, and ultimately becomes old and becomes childlike again. Not childish, childlike. So he becomes childlike again, very innocent, and is very happy, blah, blah, blah. So we say that whatever starts, it comes back full circle to it, but it doesn't stop there. At the end of the life, the soul, the Atman, or that space that we talked about, using the Panchamahabhut, takes on to another form. And so that soul has a journey. In each life form or life, it has this sheath of the Panchamahabhut. We call it the body. And from one life form to the other, this body keeps on changing. Okay, so that's the journey of the soul from Gangotri to the Bay of Bengal. Okay, so what I did was because she's from the East, her parents are Buddhist, so I took that circle of life and I cut it and I opened it and made it linear. So how does in the West, life is linear. There is no rebirth. You're born, you're dead, and you're gone. There's nothing left. So here's what I did. There's a bench here. That line has a journey now. So I call it the journey of the line. So if you follow that red line for a minute, there's a bench here. That same line of the bench becomes entertainment cabinet, becomes a fireplace, and then it crosses the wall. It becomes barbecue outside. It further crosses. It becomes the ledge of the pool. And the kids can sit on this ledge and dangle their feet into the pool. And it comes to the ramada and becomes a bench again. Okay, so that circle, I cut and it opened up and it became sort of that journey. And that happens around here, along here. Okay. And then this yellow line that you're seeing, that is the setting sun of their wedding anniversary. And then on this side, there is guest house, there is a courtyard, pool, whatever, so kitchen, living, family, all of that. Now, at this point here, there is something happening, which I'm going to talk about real quick. Now, this circle that you're seeing is the journey of the sun. This is how the sun travels throughout the year. So I call it the kundali of that particular site. Because if you look at the earth, right, every point is different. So the sun for that point is different because the earth is moving in a certain way. So I make this kundali based on this. So this is the June 21st, which is the longest day. This is the equinox day. The sun rises here. And this is the shortest day. The sun rises here. And these are different times of the year when the sun is on the solstices, the summer and winter solstices. And then it comes and sets here in the evening in the winter time, sets here in the evening time. This is how I study the sun. And architecture becomes sort of a response to the sun at that particular locale. So it manifests itself through what the sun is asking me to do. All right, here we go. So here there is this slot, and that slot cuts through the wall, it cuts through the roof, and it cuts through the next wall on the other side. And it becomes something else, and I'll talk to you about it. This is the entrance. So as you come in, you're confronted by this wall that makes you turn on the right side. And on the other extreme, there is this eye of the Cyclops coming from the Greek mythology, because he is Western. So I had to bring in some of these Western theories, and Western psychology and philosophy is predominantly dominated by the Greek thought. So here is the marriage of two materials, the concrete and the block, and this marriage of the materials gives rise to the eye of the Cyclops, and that becomes on the other side. And then somebody has unmuted.
Yeah, Amitji, this is Satish here.
Sorry. Yes, we are done.
Sorry for a break. I think since it's 1 hour past,
okay,
we just want to ask anyone has few questions, but want to say Ajit ji is he has a commitment. Ajit told.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, we are almost done here, Satish ji. So just give me 2 more minutes, okay?
Ajit before he is leaving, I want to let everyone know, Ajit ji is going to talk about Char Dham Yatra next Sunday. You want to explain the details about all the 4 dhams. Ajit ji, you want to speak up? You want to say something? Ajit bhai?
I don't know if he's listening.
He's muted, so he might be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe you can call him or something.
Yeah. Sure.
So anyhow, so this is the entry of the home. You come inside and you're just, the Frank Lloyd Wright took you out. That's the kind of idea that I have here. This becomes the kitchen, and this becomes an experience of the inside to the outside. You come in from here, and that becomes an outdoor kitchen dining kind of area. And I'm just going to rush through these because there are subtle thoughts here, but we are running out of time. So I may touch base upon some of them. And here's where the sun basically comes in and aligns to this window and enters the house in a certain time of the year. And you're seeing the mountains beyond. And Mies van der Rohe was a devout follower of the Bauhaus school that was started by Walter Gropius in Germany. He said God is in the details. And I sort of interpret that as God is in the detailer, somebody who is detailing something. He's the God is inside. And therefore, then architecture manifests itself through the details. So this is like the East and West again. There's a marriage of the treads and the risers, but it's also the bamboo, which is coming from the East, from the Chinese cultures that I brought in here. And the eye of the Cyclops brings in this light, and it balances the south light and the east light in their bathroom. It becomes a hammam coming from the Indian architecture. And it brings in light. It becomes a play of light. And there are different times of the day. This hammam is constantly changing as the sun is going through the sky, traversing through the sky. And that gives you the idea of spinning planet. And in the Native American dwelling, I had observed in the Marble Canyon that how they build along these big boulders. So I took that and, I made this slot that goes all the way through the house that we saw in the plan, but it is aligned on the summer and winter solstices. So that becomes the light threshold, as we call it, the umberta or the umbro in Gujarati or Hindi. And that umbro is basically of the light. So it divides the space between the public and the private areas of the house. And that particular window that you're seeing here, that lights up on their wedding anniversary, and I'll show you how it does. And this is the view. And this is that line that is coming all the way from the other side of this house, becomes a ledge on the pool. And I'm at the bench here. And that line continues and it goes to the Ramada, and it also becomes a bench on the other side. So this is the view of the courtyard. And here's that beautiful north windows that are bringing all the north light inside. And it also becomes a dragon. Because she's Chinese, I wanted to sort of, at subconscious level, this is the head of the dragon, this is the body of the dragon, and this is the tongue of the dragon that is excited. And it also is the balcony for the master bedroom, brings in sensuality against this rough concrete. And the wind bellows that curtain sometimes. And you're looking at the tail of the dragon out here at the end, how the dragon culminates. And this is the tongue of the dragon that bellows. But this is the block that you're seeing here, which is bringing that sunlight that I talked about earlier, and it bellows in the wind. And guess what? We did this block out of concrete. These are the angles of their wedding anniversary sun. And these are the windows of the front of the house. Our names are here. And we put that cast out there. And on their wedding anniversary, the light exactly comes through this cast at 7 a.m. and casts light on this thing. Okay, and that is the piece out here, which is an absolutely peaceful place to be. Susan Felt, who was the director or the chief editor of Arizona Republic, wrote an article on this house. And the moment she stepped in this house, she said, Amit, I want to meditate in this house. And I said, Susan, you just made my day. You just made all my efforts come to fruition, because I didn't say anything. I mean, she just somehow figured it out. And this is where you see the sun setting in the slot. And this is my sketch in Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, where the sky is diving into the composition. So here, the sky dove into this composition and brought the sun along with it on May 3rd. That's the anniversary date. And this is the Pueblo Bonito in Chaco Canyon. Okay, so now coming back to the temples of the India. This is the Surya Mandir in Gujarat, exactly laid out on 23.5 degrees latitude of the tropic. And 1,000 years ago, this was built in 1026 AD. How did they figure out? I have no idea. But the sun rises along the axis of this thing, of the temple, and crosses through here, through the Samamandap, comes through the Andhana Samamandap here, and comes and strikes on the idol. There used to be an idol. There used to be a crown on the idol. The crown of the idol had a huge Kohinoor sort of diamond back in the days, where the rays would come and exactly hit that diamond and completely shine up this whole temple and the inner sanctum. But guess what? The history being told and told, Muhammad Ghaznavi looted this temple along with Somnath for God knows how many times. 17 times he looted Somnath. As we know, I don't know how many times he looted this one. But that's the story of this temple. And now it is all being reconstructed. The archaeology is taking charge of that. So I knew about this phenomena. And in 1989, I went there and I did my 12 Surya Namaskars in this temple. And this is why I pay so much emphasis to the Surya Namaskar. So here you can see the sun exactly rising behind that tree on the axis of the temple. I'm standing in the Sabha Mandap and I'm looking at the temple, and the light is exactly shining and coming, hitting the front door. There is no more idol there, no more diamond, nothing. But this is the other end of it. This is where the sun is exactly aligned. Here, it is on the this axis. And guess what? In this house, I was inspired tremendously by this phenomena. And I came back and I said, let me see if I can do something. And so I made a window in the master bedroom. And it turned out that the window was perfectly aligned. And when I saw this, my own shadow in that temple, that same shadow happens in this house on the equinox, on the March 21st and September 22nd day. You can see your own shadow 100 feet inside the house. And this is the Khidrapur Kopeshwar temple. I've been here as well. So between May 5th and May 10th, each year in the month of Vaishak Shukla Paksha, in the Chaitra Nakshatra. See how precise these people were? This temple is also 1,000 years old, built out of hard granite. And this light exactly comes inside and casts its light on this pinda inside the Shiva Linga. And all of this has stayed in my psyche. It also stayed in during when I was doing this World Trade Center memorial competition. The concept here says a lot. If you can imagine that, if we say that everything is Ananta, the space is Anant, the infinite existence. If existence is infinite, beginningless, endless, timeless, could there be any beginning or end within it? So that becomes a question for us to ponder about. And so what is life and death then, right? Are they illusions? Are they real beginnings? Or is there a real end about something? Or it is just this journey of the soul from one life form to the other? So I made this whole competition. I aligned this building on the September 11 sun axis, and things happen in this building on September 11. It celebrates, the sun celebrates it. And it also bestows this beautiful light. I have designed a continuum coffee table. And so that is probably my last slide here. And so again, in my little way of working and establishing this thesis about unconditioning of the mind, how do I do that in the practice of furniture design or architecture, right? So it's called the continuum of coffee table. It says human minds are conditioned to think of a table in terms of top and the legs. So we establish this hierarchy in our mind that is coming from the conditioning. With apparent hierarchy, however, this design wants to break away from this hierarchy and give the legs a moment on the surface of the table through the lap joinery. So here you can see how the leg is one with the top. You cannot really say where the leg ends and where the top begins. So the universe is a continuum from the nearest blade of the grass to the farthest star. It is one without the second. It is the Advaita, right? This simple table, although a very small part of this continuum, wants to reflect as a model where the top, legs, and the shelves become one without the hierarchy. So this was my presentation for the teachers training that I recently did. So I'm going to open this up. If anybody has any questions, you can turn on your videos. And here we go. I'm sorry I took a little bit more time, but
no, very inspiring. I mean, like, it was a lot of depth you have been to, like, we were able to capture some of them, at least some of them. But I have few questions. Amitji, you made it relevant at the end, like, you talked about the temple. So even in those days, they designed with the sunlight. So I have been to Konark temple.
Yes.
I was amazed with I thought it was a myth. They keep talking about, like, how the sunrise decides the time of the day. They can, by looking at the sunlight, they'll say what time, minute and hour. Is it true?
Yes, it is absolutely right. There is the wheel of the Konark temple is the sundial. So if you ever go there, and then these wheels and these sundials. So in the 15th, 16th century, Savai, the king of, king of Jaipur, he has done this Jantar Mantar in Jaipur. Savai Mansingh, there you go. Thanks for saying that.
Yeah.
So he was an astronomer, astrologer, he had in-depth knowledge about this. So he's built these sundials and they're accurate up to 2 seconds. That's how accurate they are. So yes, people knew a lot more than what we can think of today. We are on this journey of sort of washing out of all these erosions are happening through this cultural diversity and what have you. We've lost so much knowledge that we can't even think of, and I don't know how we will ever gain it back unless thorough research and backing of the government and all of that is sort of applied into this whole thing. So anyway, anybody else?
So one more question. Yeah, Amitji, this is Dr. Jain here.
Yes, sir.
Hey, I'm just wondering, fantastic. The only, do you a believer of this Vastu? Like, you haven't mentioned anything in your architect plan, or is all based on Vastu?
Okay, so I do not particularly make an attempt towards Vastu because I think it is part of the conditioning of the mind again. And it's sort of, and in today's world, I believe that there is a lot of abuse going on with the Vastu. People are instilling fear in people, and that fear factor really works. So I purposely stayed away from this whole Vastu idea, but I focused myself more on the unconditioning of the mind that allows one to sort of see things more clearly. So for instance, a Western person like Susan Felt, born and brought up in the United States, enters this house and says, I want to meditate in this house. Okay, so with that clarity of the thought, I feel that things automatically fall in place without having to make any special attempt towards it.
Got you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I think the best part, Amit ji,
Yes,
first
sir.
understanding our ancient, temples, their architecture is the first thing, and then replicating here in your own way in modern time. That's a great achievement, and I really want to congratulate you. And it's really exciting, and I think modern architectures or science, they can learn something from this.
Correct.
Way. So.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, you exactly did that. You went to temple, you saw that how rays are coming and how is illuminating, and you
Yes.
implemented here. So that's really amazing. It's very difficult to replicate. So
Thank
that's a
you.
great achievement. I want to really congratulate and really impressed.
Thank you very much. So again, coming back to the analogy of the kumbha that I was talking about, right? The space inside is unaffected by whether this kumbha is made out of earth, or it is made out of gold, or it is made out of, whether it has ornate carvings in it, or it is just a simple kumbha, right? So, like Kabir, I think somewhere has said that once you light the lamp, does it matter whether the lamp is made out of mud or whether it is made out of gold? That lighting of the lamp is important. So, in what I'm trying to say is the architecture outwardly doesn't really matter. What matters is the space and the energy that flows inside and what you feel in there. Yeah.
But Amitji, did you get a chance to, like, since you are in the same domain, normally, like, when the temples are constructed, even now at Maricopa Temple and everything, like, when they consecrate an idol, they will go with a lot of energy factors. They
Yes.
will, on the chakras, they will put the Shakti chakras. I'm
Correct.
not an expert in those, but they do this just to
Right.
generate that positive energy inside the
Correct.
Garbhagudi, right?
Correct. So let me put it this way, right?
Mhm.
What is important is that prana pratishtha, that kriya, that puja that is done, right?
Mhm.
What is another next factor that is important is the geometry, because geometry plays an immense role. Like if you look at the pyramids of Giza, right? The geometry of the Pisa of the Giza pyramids is extremely important. The why these mummies were stored at exactly 1/3 and 2/3 chamber. Okay, those geometries were known to the people, and as long as you follow those geometries, whether then you do ornate carvings or not, to me it really doesn't matter, because if you look at it, you go to the inner sanctum of any temple, and if you see whether plain walls or they are ornate walls, right? Because ultimately what matters is the proportions. Ultimately what matters is whether these geometries, and certain geometries do, like the yantras that we have, they have certain things that that could be a whole different discussion, that we can talk about. The Shri Yantra and the Sumeru and all of that, right?
Exactly.
So those are sacred geometries. Those are symbolisms that are, and people are still discovering them. It's there, but I'm not expert on that, right? But at the same time, I say that when you approach something with purity of the mind, these things manifest through you. It happens as a manifestation rather than you doing it. It is coming through you. Like, there is a symbolism of Krishna holding the basuri. Why Krishna is holding basuri, right? Kabira again says that you become the pongri of the bas and let the divinity flow through you and create music.
Amitji.
Right? So, yes, sir.
No, continue. Sorry. I thought you were.
Okay.
Please.
No, go ahead.
First, thank you for, you brought the tears of joy to my eyes. I'm really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Two questions. One is about, you mentioned the east versus west and curves. So I see a lot of architecture, especially in US, is mostly boxes or squares. And there are not a lot of curves in there in the architecture. What is your take on that? Is it the cost factor or it's the design factor? That's one question. And the second part is you're sitting in the corner, I believe. You're in the corner of the room.
Yes.
And I'm
Yes.
also sitting in the corner. I don't know how this happened, but like I was sitting, I tried different positions in this room, and then this is the place I ended up being. Are there any significance to that? Two different questions, but wanted to.
Okay, so I happen to be sitting here. I
Okay.
didn't plan it. So,
In fact, I'm also in the corner.
okay, so there is something about a corner, right? The corner is where the two walls meet.
Right.
Okay, there is this meeting of these two walls, and that opens up certain opportunities to sort of create an opening or create so these walls come so close that they belong to each other,
Right.
but they don't belong to each other at the same time when you make an opening there. And I showed you that there was a corner glass window.
Right.
And I like to particularly play with the corner because corner makes the joint, right? So industrialization took all the ornamentation out for mass production, right?
Right.
So that was the cost factor involved of stripping everything out of the ornament. But then the corner gave an architect the opportunity to create a detail. And then that detail became sort of the ornament of the modern architecture. Now, you asked me whether the boxes or circles or what have you, right? See, not every building is architecture. Building is not architecture. You know, Khan, again, I'm going to quote you. He said that there is architecture has no presence. Music has no presence.
Right.
And you might be stunned by hearing this, right? Music has no presence, architecture has no presence, but yeah, that's true. What has presence is the work of architecture.
Exactly.
What has presence is the work of music, right?
Right.
So if you look at it that way, not every building has an architect who can do the prana pratishtha onto that building and instill architecture in it. Not every architect can do.
Right.
So there are many professional architects who are creating buildings for shrewd profit making, like I said.
Right.
They're
Right.
using architecture, they're milking it to make money. That's not architecture. So be very mindful of that. And I would really encourage you to find pockets of beauty when you are awestruck by something, when you feel something inside, that's when you realize that there is architecture in this building.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Otherwise, they are dead buildings to me. If there is no soul.
Yeah. I just to bring back the point, because the reason I asked is the building. So Sadhguru's ashram in Coimbatore and even in Tennessee, they have made this dome-shaped building. So obviously, that is different because he has done the Pran Pratishtha and the Mercury and everything is there. But
Yes.
the architecture itself is like you go in and you're meditative by the nature of the place, as that lady said. And it's amazing to me that how important a place like is. It can define your success or failure or pretty much anything. If you're in the wrong side, completely another like unrelated topic. Like I'm thinking of my car lease got over. So in terms of I'm thinking of the new car, I'm deciding between like, okay, new or used, beautiful or not beautiful, like, or raw. And all these factors are coming because I'm like, maybe I don't want the energy or the space of the person before me who was driving that car. So even though it's, I don't know if it makes sense or not, but it's kind of interesting how these whole things are interconnected, interrelated in terms of energy and space and time.
Yeah, see, ultimately it is the unbroken reality, right?
Right.
Ultimately, it's all one. It's
Right.
all Advaita. I mean,
Right.
because of our sense of perception, our sense of existence, the Dvaita starts.
Exactly.
Right? I am separate from Satish. I'm
Right.
separate from Nikhil.
Right.
That's the moment you have that perception, the Dvaita starts.
Right.
Okay. So, talking about this idea of, again, Buddha, he was very weak. He performed his austerities to so extent that he was completely, he lost all the fat and the muscles and everything. He was like, and he was trying to cross the river at the same time. And there were these few ladies who were carrying this pot on their head, and they were singing a song. And the meaning of that song was that if you tighten the strings of the veena too tight, there is no music. If you tighten it or loosen it, there is no music.
Right.
If you perfectly tighten it, it gives rise to the music. Right?
Right.
So when you have that understanding, and once you have that all in the background, and when you surrender yourself in the moment of creation, right? The creation happens when you're not there.
Absolutely.
When you are there, buildings happen. When you're not there, architecture happens.
Exactly.
Right?
Absolutely.
Same thing,
Wonderful.
Amit, you mentioned about the dome in Rome.
Yes, the Pantheon.
Pantheon. I have been there, and
Yeah.
and you lose once you move into certain architecture, you lose the magnanimity or whatever it is. Can you please explain? I have seen it. By looking at it, I was amazed, but I don't know much details in it. If you can explain in your language for a little, very short, what so beautiful.
Okay, so I'm going to be honest with you. I've studied that building so much, but I haven't been there.
Oh,
Okay, I haven't experienced what you have, but I can tell you some technical aspects of it. It was one of the largest domes built by the Roman architecture back then, whenever it was built in the early 4th century or something, right? But that oculus in the center, okay, that oculus is open to sky. It rains there. But it is also a sundial. So when the sun comes in, it casts its oval on a particular side of on a particular day. It will be casting its shadow or light on a particular carving on that ring which is around. And I believe those are the 12 months. And there are certain times of the day that this oculus is constantly shifting. And it creates this effect of as though you are on a spinning planet. Now, other thing I'll tell you, that you can experience this in Scottsdale, Arizona. Okay, I'll tell you. So what happens is when you look at that oculus, it is so huge and big, right? That the sky, you lose the perception that the sky is three-dimensional out there. Because see, when you look up in the sky, your eyes cannot tell that that star is farther and this moon is nearer. You lose the sense of three-dimensionality after a certain point. Okay, so that is something that they've done there. When you look at that oculus, you cannot tell whether that sky is right at the oculus or whether it is way out there until a bird flies through. That's when you sense it. Okay, oh wow, that's an opening. You know. Now you go to the Scottsdale Museum of Contemporary Art. You don't go to the museum. On the left side, there is an installation by James Turrell. It's called The Night, K-N-I-G-H-T. But it's also about the night. So you have to go there when the sun is setting, at the twilight time. Okay, the sun is setting, and the sky is changing the color of, and you go and sit there on the bench, and you experience the same Pantheon, and you will call me that day when you experience that.
Oh, sure. Wow.
Okay, because the way that is installed is absolutely amazing. Yeah, and it's right here in our town. People don't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Amitji.
You're welcome.
Amitji.
Yes.
Amitji, I'm Vasudha.
Ah, Vasudha. Yes.
Actually, I'm from Bangalore.
Yes.
So here the temple is there in Gavipuram. Ravi Gangadhareswara temple. That we, on the day of Ratha Saptami, the sunrise fall on that.
There you go.
Same day, that in the same time, 12 o'clock in the afternoon, sunrise fall on that.
Fantastic.
See, I loved the way how you have connected yoga and then architecture. See how yoga is connected with the nature, peace, calmness of mind, and then fitness of body, and then complete satisfaction of mind. So like that, architecture is also connected with the nature. See, any other software, if wherever you can sit and do any software, but architecture, it needs the nature, embodiment of nature, and then that building. And then the way building and then house, how you differentiated that. See, whenever you enter any house, see, you have to feel that comfort. See, whenever you enter a temple, you feel that devotion, like bhakti enters. See, whenever you enter any house, the comfort enters.
Right.
And then one more thing, I always believe in that ancient art of this one, Vastu. But it has some east, southeast corner kitchen. southwest corner, southeast corner kitchen, southwest corner master bedroom, and then entry Brahmasthana. How do you explain the Brahmasthana? See, like in the yoga, Brahmasthana, like Uddiyana Bandha, yesterday you taught us.
Yes.
That we should be empty.
Yes.
See, our Indian architecture also, that Brahmasthana should be empty.
Nice.
I have already designed so many houses, very much into that. So I was my own house I have designed.
Nice.
But I learned so much from you today.
Oh, thank you. I'm humbled.
That is how the satisfaction, calmness of mind, and then art, science of yoga, and then architecture definitely connects us very nicely. And then
Thank
perfection. One more thing, we want to go into perfection in yoga. Like
Correct.
that, we want to go into perfection in architecture. I want to ask one question.
Yes.
You have designed so many projects. If you go, I think anytime you want to change your, that should have done like this, that thought anytime it came into your mind?
That's a good question. So, you know what happens, like I said earlier, that in the time of creation, then there is this afterthoughts about certain things, right? And those afterthoughts are nothing but coming from the conditioning of the mind, of the conscious mind. Okay. So at the time of creation, you are basically hijacked by the creator, sort of, if I can say it in that words, that you are losing. So B.V. Doshi, Balkrishna Doshi, who is a practicing architect in Ahmedabad, he says that when he puts the pen and paper, he observes the dialogue between the pen and the paper. Okay, he becomes the witness of what is the paper saying and what is the pen saying. And in that dialogue, something happens on the paper, right? So when that creation is happening, you are basically not there. You are a silent witnessing or witness to that of the creation. But later on, what happens is when you see it and your conscious mind takes over, and then sometimes you get this thought that, okay, now I have to make this rationally work in this world. Now all these codes and bylaws are going to apply to that. And how is that all going to stand up? How is it going to work? So that rational thought sometimes does make some changes, but those are basically of the afterthought. Yeah. It's a post thinking process.
Thank you very much.
I mean, in this particular house, if I were to answer your question, I did not change even one thing. 99% of what was visualized got built. Yeah.
My house also I designed 12 years back, 2008. Until now, I didn't thought of changing anything.
Thank you.
Anyone who entered never gave any
yes.
Thank you, Amitji. Thank you so much for all the time.
Thank you.
Your presentation. Thank you.
I hope you all enjoyed, and
thanks, Amit. Sorry, I had to go away, but I am back again. So thanks a lot.
Who is this? Sorry.
Very originally. This is Ajit. Yeah.
Okay, Ajit.
Yeah.
Oh, Ajit wants to make an announcement.
Yeah. For the next